Good day. Today we're here as part of the COVID-19 New Normal series of the University of Nottingham Asia Research Institute. Today we're very lucky to have Dato Steve Wong, who is a public policy researcher, someone who has been in ISIS, the think tank, in Malaysia for a number of decades, last serving as the Deputy Chief Executive Officer, and is actually very knowledgeable over a period of time of looking at Malaysia in terms of dealing with crises. And so our topic today is to look at what sort of lessons from the past does they offer for the crisis today. So Stephen, let's start right ahead. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me, Dr.
So,
Welsh.
Can you please tell me what you think are the three most important lessons in looking at crisis management in Malaysia in the past for managing crisis today in COVID-19?
Well, I think the present crisis, the three things I think will come of no surprise to most people who have observed Malaysia, especially from the political, social, and the economic. The first lesson is that the COVID-19, I think, exposes to us the real divisions, even fractures within the Malaysian society, and it exposes it in a very real way. We have been talking about these divisions and these fractures for quite a long time, but nothing really brings it home, until something like this happens. And the politics of ethno-religious class divisions has been something of a national sport. All right, it's become accepted, and we look at it and we carry on with these things within not only within the elites but within society, because we've never had to bear the consequences. We have never had to bear the responsibility. We haven't seen the real impact, that this can have until something like COVID or conflict or tensions of that affect the whole country come to play. And when this happens, then I think it really exposes these divisions and fractures in a very real way. The second thing I think that it exposes, what the current COVID-19 thing exposes, it exposes what some of us have been arguing for a very long time, and that is economic fragility of the Malaysian economy. It's very hard to argue that the Malaysian economy is not what it can be, because when oil prices are at $100 a barrel, when palm oil prices are good, this covers a multitude of weaknesses and sins within the economy. But for those of us who look at where employment is being generated, where incomes are being generated, how much are being filtered down to 80% or 90% of the official workforce, you see that it is not what it should be. And this whole episode now shows us how those bases are really not strong. They are actually quite weak. Likewise, it also exposes to us our sources of revenue. Again, there have been those that have been playing around, batting around, revenue raising, etc. Everyone trying to kick the ball down the road. Nobody wanting to bite the bullet, because who wants to raise taxes, who wants to raise things. But all of this now is being shown, I think, in terms of the economic fragility of the economy, the government, but most importantly, I think it shows the economic fragility. And again, we have been talking about this, of the B40, the B50, maybe even the B60. Bank Negara has said on time and time again that the households in Malaysia, most of them do not have enough to cover even 1 month, in terms of in terms of emergency? Well, because there has been constant streams of income, all right, and there was never a question of some money coming across, that had never to be uncovered. But now, in the situation where the economy is, I would say, crumbling, all right, these things now become very in your face. It becomes very real. Mm-hmm. And I think the third lesson that you ask, I think it just exposes something that is within the administrative system, and that it exposes those who are competent and those who are incompetent, all right, both at the elite level, at the technocratic level, and I think that this makes the whole, when you come to an incident like this, it is very clear who is capable and who is not capable. You can have all kinds of titles, and you can have all kinds of portfolios, and you can have all kinds of duties, responsibilities, and positions in committees and cabinets and in GLCs, etc. But competence counts, all right? And that the fact that maybe the competence levels have not been as high as what they should be has also muted our responses to being able to meet this particular crisis. So those are my three lessons.
And they're all very serious in terms of looking at the issues of the social fragmentations, the economic fragility, and as well as the issue of competency. From a perspective of someone who's been in the policy environment in Malaysia, which of these do you think is most viable to address in the short term of the crisis? And in what sort of steps would you take in terms of from learning from the past in terms of addressing these right now?
Well, I wouldn't say the most important, but the two most important, because they are very tightly integrated, is the first and the second. Because, how do you put it? The economy does not survive on its own. The economy exists because people work in the economy, and those same people who work in the economy are those that participate in society and in terms of interactions. Now, because of the way that the economy and society is striated, there are these fragmentations, etc., that we have in the past recognized and tried to address in some shape or form. Something of this nature has actually leveled out. Now, there is a good part in the sense that it actually pulls away much of what self-interested leaders or politicians have been telling us, and actually been putting additional, increasing the degrees of us versus them. But this shows that actually, when you have a pandemic, virus pandemic, it doesn't see, of what race you are, what religion, but it does, bring home, I think, to the fact that there is a universality, of experience, of position, and that while it has made some parts of society more angry at others, because it's a very, we all exist in terms of from our own frames of reference, okay, and from these frames of reference, that is very common, not only in Malaysia but everywhere else, to say my frame of reference is that somebody else is responsible, somebody else, did this, somebody else is the obstacle, all right? Not that somebody else could also be the solution, all right? So these kinds of things actually, as I said, were not only exposed, but these are the things that need to be sort of put forward now. But the real thing is this: we are now about 2 months into the sort of crisis, and we are thinking, or there is a thinking, not me personally, but there is a thinking that within 4 or 5 months or so, maximum at 6 months, we'll come out of this and everything will return to a degree of normalcy. Well, there are reasons to expect that, but there are also reasons, there are equally valid reasons that this may not occur. If this does not occur, then what you will see is that the economic basis for the economy will very quickly crumble, right? And they will crumble, and of course, they will affect the B40, the B50, the B60 more than just about anyone, because, you know, as I say, you know, they have no savings as such. They have not much in EPF. They have not much in, you know, any kind of safety net. And the kinds of things that are being offered, they're nice to offer, but they really do not make a whole set of difference, you know, to the current circumstances. So when you have this breakdown of the economy, these social striations are going to get worse. They're not going to get better, right? So we have to think of a way that hopefully, if all things go well, then we'll be out of this within some months. But if they do not, and they persist, then we might very well face a situation where, you know, like has happened in other countries, ones with even a stronger economic base than ourselves, where you're looking at anything upwards of 10, 12, 15% unemployment, increasing poverty, etc. These things do not bode well. I mean, you cannot construct a cohesive society, a united society, a fractular society when the economy is crumbling.
I want you to unpack, Stephen, a little bit about what you see as happening to the economy. What, you know, you talk about it's having a crumbling effect. What are the kind of dynamics that that challenge the sense that there's going to be a return back to normal? What are the specific things that you would point to?
Well, we have a number of, this is, I mean, the term perfect storm is quite overused, but in this case, we actually do have a perfect storm, or elements that almost resemble a perfect storm. I think in the past, when we had a crisis of this sort, barring the 85 commodity collapse, but during the Asian financial crisis and during the 2008 global financial crisis, we still had the ability to buy or to earn foreign currency. Foreign currency is equal to high-powered money within the monetary base, you know, that sort of creates the whole Malaysian economic experience. Okay, because essentially we don't consume many things in ringgit terms, right? So where we have this collapse in oil prices now, with recovery, without recovery, I think that the global, sort of experience is that we are locked into these kinds of numbers, right? At least for the good while. Now, once you experience this, it may recover in 6 months, in 12 months' time, but it never really, to have a recovery in 6 or 12 months' time does not make up for what has been lost in the present 6 months and in the coming additional 6 months. Okay, so there will be a recovery, but you will find that you will leave behind a huge swath of workers, of industries, of businesses that are not able to function. They cannot put their businesses on hold and say, I'll open again in 12 months' time. That's not the way it works. Okay, that's not how business works. So many of them would have lost their jobs. They would have lost, their employers would have lost their capital. The businesses would have to be closed. This is tantamount to capital destruction. Okay, if capital is destruction, then if you want to build that base back up again, there has to be capital building. Okay, and that is where the sort of problem comes in. Now, in all of this, the government actually can provide incentives, they can provide soft loans, they can provide all manner of support, but they cannot build capital. All right. I mean, yes, you can increase the number of GLC jobs, etc. But there is a finite number to which you can create. The capital destruction has to be compensated, in those terms. And there are jobs that are lost, businesses that are lost, that are essentially lost forever. Okay, new ones can come on, all right. New ones can take over, but I think when we have seen this in the past, it's never really the same. It's never back to normalcy again.
When you talk about the past in terms of the Asian financial crisis or the 2008, 2009 crisis, are there specific sort of historical lessons or reflections that you would like to highlight that kind of showcase what you're trying to say?
In 2008 and 2009, we were actually not in a bad position. There was, of course, like there is now, an outsized, disproportionate fear. So the first reaction to when something like this happens is, oh, the lights have turned off. Okay, we are peering into darkness, and it doesn't quite work that way. At each stage, because in 2000 and 2009, we had certain things going for us, right? We had, for example, enough economic resilience within the public finance system so that we were able to offer stimulus sort of packages. But the good thing about the 2008 and 2009 was that after that fear was over, in fact, months, okay, after that fear was over, everything picked up and swung back, and therefore, there was this very strong swing, so that by the time you came down to, we had a stimulus package early on in 2009, but by the end of the year, by the end of 2009, the economy was already picked up, and there were investments again, and the exports had sort of come back on stream again. I don't think that this is going to happen this time, because the economic impacts have not only affected the US, they've not only affected Europe, they not only have affected China, although China has probably been having the better part of it. When you have this kind of a broad-based thing, even if we see recovery, that recovery may not be of sufficient momentum or size to actually pull us out, to make us better off than when we went in. Okay, and I think that we are going to have to take that. If we look at this thing 30, 40 years ago, it was expected that when you have a recession or a very deep recession, that the standards of living would be affected. In today's ethos, governments cannot tolerate politically, and they cannot get in their heads that actually things like this have to be borne by a lowering of standards of living, because we can always create money, we can always print our way out of this problem, we can always spend our way out of this problem. I don't think that is much of an avenue that we can go through now.
What do you think should be the key steps ahead now? What would you do or recommend?
It's a matter of priorities. Okay. Where I am in Australia, there is a lot of emphasis in terms of keeping businesses alive, afloat. Okay. But this is premised on the assumption that these businesses should be kept alive and should be kept afloat, and that these will contribute to employment, or at least lesser unemployment. Okay, I would say that in the case of Malaysia, where we have cut corners on manufacturing, on so many of the on the retail and wholesale sectors, etc., I don't think that they will ever come back to the same shape and form as when we went into this direction. So it's a matter of priorities. The priorities that I would place are not probably the priorities that economic policy elites would place. And that is to ensure, right? It sounds quite, socialist and this thing, but, and I'm not one, but, first, once you have things like greater poverty, greater stresses on the ability on where the next meal is coming from in terms of these things, you will see a very rapid further escalation of the kind of social rifts, all right? And I think that then would virtually be additional stress on what it means that to call ourselves Malaysia a country or a nation or whatever collective you wish to sort of refer to it. So I would say that and this is assuming that things do not get really out of hand, okay? And I don't think that they will, but the bottom 40, 50, 60% are extremely stressed at the moment, okay? And I think that in terms of priority-wise, right, I would be catering to that, the whole collective, then the question is where you're going to get these, these sort of resources. But that would be the main priority, because you cannot be talking about all the fancy bells and whistles, etc., if the base of the pyramid, the ones who, the 7-8 million households, all right, that are stressed are not adequately provided for, if they have real sort of needs. Okay, the rest of it, the sort of genius policies, etc., don't really come into play, if the base of it crumbles.
So you're advocating for expanding the social safety net. Do you continue the same sort of measures that have been adopted before, or would you suggest thinking about out of the box and different initiatives?
Oh, look, I mean, a lot of what has been touted as social safety nets, let's be frank about it, or I can be frank about it, okay? They have been very, so I say, politically expedient type of safety nets that have actually not amounted to a whole hill of beans, okay? To say it's a safety net, it's a very flimsy, ethereal sort of safety net, all right? It takes care of you, even if you talk about the, whatever forms of direct transfers, these transfers, if you had to depend on one of these transfers, never mind that you're a family, you wouldn't even survive. I wouldn't be around talking to you if I was on one of them, right? Because it's not sufficient, because it's not this thing. Now, I'm not saying, now I know that all the arguments about giving the moral hazards and the wrong incentives in terms of this thing, but in situations like these, you have to hold the bottom 40, 50% together. Otherwise, the rest of what you try to build on top of this, does not matter.
Well, thank you very much, Dato Stephen Wong, for sharing your thoughts with us. I think we could continue the conversation, but we're trying to keep these sessions short so that people can watch them and reflect on them. We greatly appreciate you sharing your time today. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers.